Hello and welcome everyone. It's always a pleasure for me to be at the Khushwant Singh Literature Festival, but today is exceptionally special because I have an author here today whose life story really reads like a film script. There are twists, there are turns, there's passionate love, and there's deep heartbreaks, there's spiraling highs and the bottom of the barrel lows. Kabir Bedi, actor, author, even knight, congratulations on a wonderful book.
Thank you, Sarah. I deeply appreciate that. And I want to thank Rachel also for a wonderful introduction. I'm so glad you enjoyed the book, and I look forward to chatting about it with you.
So, Kabir, you know, personally, I was sucked into the book right away because it begins with your tryst with journalism, right? Your first chapter is about when you were a journalist. Out of, you know, one of those 9 lives that you've led was where you were a reporter. And as you put it there in the book, you say that you got an exclusive with the Beatles, face-to-face, Beatle by Beatle, a thrilling achievement for a 20-year-old freelance reporter who was then with All India Radio, which was a government monopoly. And, you know, that's awesome. That's quite a coup. So as a reporter, when I read the book, some of the things that reached out to me was that you said when you first told your boss, they laughed at you and they thought it was impossible. Yet you persisted. And that was the thread that reached out to me in this entire book. A lot of gumption, a lot of drive. I remember there was an audition that you were asked to fly yourself out to. I think it was to Sandokan. You know, most actors, given the success that you were an actor then, you were a recognizable face, most actors probably would have let their egos respond saying, you know, no, you have to fly me out there.
So that's one of the things that I learned very early in life, and that is learning to recognize opportunity. And it's very important because, you know, I entered Bollywood. I had a successful film very early in my career, and I shot at being a leading man in Bollywood. But I didn't fancy myself as being a singing, dancing star. And I've always said I love singing and dancing in Bollywood films. It's an integral part of them. They do it more brilliantly than anybody in the world. It's like opera for the Italians. I don't question that. I enjoy watching them, but I'm not a singer, dancer myself, and I thought it'd be enough. And then I realized it wasn't enough. So I realized if I wanted a career abroad, I'd have to expand my horizons. So when the Italians came to town looking for an actor, and then my name was mentioned to them, and I went to see them, and they liked what they saw, but they said, you've got to come at your own cost. For a moment, of course, I bristled. You know, I'm an established actor. They can't just order me around. I'm not some starving newcomer. But I realized this could change my whole dynamic. It could be exactly what I'm looking for. So I accepted without a fuss, mailed my audition, and got the role, which went on to give me huge stardom in Europe. So all those things.
I think it was Fellini who said to you that luck matters, but the kind of success that you saw or that you've had, it's more than luck.
Yes, yes. I was trying to be bashful. I said to Fellini, he said, you know, congratulations, you've made such an impact on my country. And I was with Parveen, and he was with Giulietta Sina, his wife and his muse, who he'd done many films with, who had won many awards for Best Actress. And to be invited out to Fellini was a huge honor. And when he met me and he saw the reactions, I mean, first he complimented me on my huge success. But when he saw the reaction of the people in the restaurant, he said, it's amazing what you've achieved. And I said, I was lucky to get the role, sir. And he said, luck is important, but this kind of success, you know. So that was a huge compliment.
Chronologically, you begin your book in the start with your relationship with Pratima Bedi, who you went on to marry and have 2 children with. You were known to have an open marriage, and you were celebrated as path breakers, heralding a new era of permissiveness, as you said, while globally the Beatles were symbols in India, you both were. But interestingly, you say in your book it wasn't by choice. It was not your choice.
Well, it was an age that was changing all around us. And we reveled in being the forerunners of a whole new age, of a whole new liberated attitude towards things. the Jew gang, the very bohemian gang. We had a very chilled out view of the world, and the marriage with Pratima began like a traditional marriage. Okay, well, not quite a traditional marriage. She was already when I got to us. It began like that. Now, how a relationship goes from there to becoming an open marriage, what are the circumstances? What are the dramas that take place? What are the things that make a normal marriage into an open marriage? That I've shared in my book, and I want to elaborate on that too much. But there is a process that you go through. And I think open marriage seemed like a good idea at first, but in the end, it didn't work. And why it didn't work again, I've shared that. Because these are things that not many people experience in their lives, but I wanted to share that experience and share that journey with all the emotional turbulence that it involves, all the thrills and chills of having a relationship that's turbulent.
I want to talk a little bit about loss, because as much as this book is about your incredible highs, it's also about dealing with painful loss. First, Parveen Babi, then also, of course, your son, to whom you've dedicated this book, both of whom suffered from mental health issues. You speak very movingly of your son's suicide, of how you saw all the warning signs, how you did the most that anyone could. You gave him access to the best doctors. You were in America and California at that point of time, only then to see him take his own life. As a parent, I cannot imagine what that feels like or could have felt like. But it's been over 2 decades since this happened. Could you talk to us a little bit about your own recovery from this tragedy? How did you process your grief, and how difficult was it to revisit this in order to write your book, the craft of being able to separate the personal from the need to be honest to a reader who's spending money on picking up your book?
Good question, Sarah. Good question. And let me deal with the latter part. It was something I wanted to share because I think it's very important to share what happens in a situation like that. What happens when a son comes to a father and says, I'm thinking of committing suicide? What do you do? How do you deal with it? How do you avert that? And what are the circumstances of that medical condition that in a sense get in the way of that also? So, but for me, to revisit all that was very important because I wanted to share that. So that revisitation itself was traumatic in its own way, because it reopened wounds that had actually become scars. The pain had diminished, but the scars remained. Now I had to reopen the scars and say, go back into that and relive that whole experience and to put it down. It's not easy. It's not easy, but it was necessary. And my feeling, Sarah, was that and I must say today's medicines are much better, so it's not a story that where people lose hope or people should lose hope. But the aftermath of something like that, the guilt one feels, is enormous. No matter how much you did, everyone connected with the person who passed away has a sense of guilt. I could have done something or said something to them. His suicide came at a time when I was also financially down in the dumps, so it was a double whammy. And I really had to resurrect myself from the ruins of that state of being, emotionally, financially, materially, in every way. And again, you have to go back into enormous inner sources and give yourself the strength and say, I will overcome, I will rise again, I will not accept defeat.
Kabir Bedi, you touched upon this, but basically since from 1995, you faced a series of professional and financial, as you put it, professional, financial and emotional disasters. You said you rose from the ashes of stunning misfortunes, traumatic experiences that ruined you, left you shattered. You talked about bouts of depression. Again, I want to ask, was it difficult to write about this, now about yourself? Especially having dealt with two loved ones who've lost their lives to mental health issues and being an actor in a profession where perception is very important. So you are straddling both the worlds, or you have one foot in the world of acting and in the other foot being an author.
Yes. Well, there are two different questions, really. One is, how do you deal with that, those reverses? How do you rise from that situation? And the other thing is writing about it. You know, at the time going through it, it was very, you know, very traumatic for me. And I came to terms with that and I moved on. Now, as an author, I had a choice. Either I can whitewash it and you know, make it look like a nice airbrushed painting, telling people what a great man I am and how everything was roses, but it wasn't. And I chose to just tell it like it was, because I think that's the real story. The real story is the story of being human, of seeing amazing triumph, success that actors dream of but never achieve or rarely achieve. And then seeing the absolute depths of personal sorrow, financial ruin, great loves, great losses. That's the drama of life. That is the essence of being human. I've seen it in its most extreme in some ways. And I thought, you know, I've got a good story to tell you, and I must tell it. And I think the best thing I could do would be to tell it as honestly as I can, as authentically as I can, so people can share my journey vicariously.
You certainly have an incredible story, so the raw material is all there. But in terms of craft, then how did you document, you know, facts, figures? Was it memory? Did you happen to keep a diary? Because, for example, the chapter about your parents, which to me was an amazing story. I had no idea, obviously, that they were part of India's freedom struggle. Your mother was a hand-picked satyagrahi of Gandhi and their time in Kashmir, but you were a child then. So in terms of craft as an author.
Yes. No, the period, you're right. The period before independence was, I wasn't there at all. I was just born on the cusp of India's independence. Everything that I talk about, their lives and their part in the Indian freedom struggle, and her being a satyagrahi and my father being a flaming communist, all those were things I heard through family folklore, as well as the fact that I was lucky that 3 books have been written on my mother, one by Andrew Whitehead, one by Naomi Levine, and one by Vicky Mackenzie. 3 books have been written on her mother because it's an extraordinary story of this woman who goes from revolution to religion and then rises to the highest ranks of Buddhism and becomes the highest ranked Buddhist nun in the world. I mean, that's and an English woman who comes to fight for India's freedom. So she's a great story in herself. And my father's a great story in himself because he too had his incredible moments of revelation, which I share in the book, and developed his own philosophy, despite having the greatest reverence for our Sikh tradition. We are descendants of Guru Nanak, and him writing books on Guru Nanak and how he made that transition. And then I also had letters by them and to me, to each other. So I was able to quote letters and very poignant letters from my mother to me, from my father writing about my mother. Then there were audio recordings that my mother left behind, which I'd kept very carefully. So, and in fact, I provided the source material of a lot of the books that were written on my mother, although I must add that Andrew Whitehead's immaculate research and knowledge of India and the Kashmir situation added to my knowledge. But so that period of my life, I certainly had a lot of sources to draw on. The other periods of my life, I did largely from memory because I could only tell stories about things I remember. I had to go back and double check some dates and do a little research. And I also had a number of letters. For instance, in my chapter on Parveen, I quote her letters. The letters I wrote to her, she wrote to me. And those were very rich in terms of the way we would speak to each other or address each other and the kind of intensity of the love that we felt for each other, that can only come through actual words spoken at that time.
Mm.
And that's what I've been able to share in my book.
But so why now then? Why did you write? Because this is an incredible story. It could have been written any time. Why did this book happen now?
Various reasons. I've always been talking about writing a book, and work would always intervene, or other things would come in the way. Because when you're, say, shooting a film, you get completely absorbed in that. There's no way you can write
Sure.
a book in that process. You rise at all hours, go to all locations, meet all kinds of strange people, do all kinds of strange things. It's another process. But I think largely the hesitation in me was because I didn't know how to tell it. I knew I had a great story, how to tell it. And I made a number of attempts, and then they all ended up in the waste paper basket, because I was bored with my own writing. I said, I would read this book. Nobody but the most diehard fan would want to read this book. And then I had about a year ago, I finally, when the pandemic began, and I really said, I've got to do this. And I sat down and thought about it. I had this epiphany of how I could tell this using the story of the short story form, and telling it as a series of short stories, which taken together tell the stories of my life, and they're not necessarily sequential. So they go back and forth in time. That gave me a lot of freedom to talk about things in different contexts, but when you put it all together, you see what my life was. So that was an interesting breakthrough for me. And I'd come to a point in my life where either I wrote my story or I didn't. So I thought, no, this is the time, and I've got to do it. It wasn't like that great saying of Martin Luther King, the time is always right to do what is right. I could have written this 15 years ago, but I do believe that having waited this long has enriched the book, because I've been able to see myself and my younger self with more dispassionate eyes, more compassionate eyes, more understanding. And I think this was very much a thing I wanted to do. And when I finally did the book, the satisfaction I had of holding a complete book in my hand was pure euphoria, pure euphoria. I said, I've finally done it. And I've been so gratified by the response my book has got. I couldn't ask for a bigger reward.
So would you say you're an author now? Can we expect more? Do you still write? Do you keep the practice? I'm not sure. I think how authors like to write a few hours every day. Do you still keep that going? Are we going to expect more from you?
I will. And let me pay tribute to Khushwant Singh here, because he was the one who gave me some very good advice on writing, which I applied. And I've spoken of this in a few other forums too. I said to him, Khushwantji, how do you write so much? You write books, you do lectures, you write articles, you edit magazines. He said, phone chakke rakhte ho. So pick up the phone, put it down. And those were the days of landlines. So it wasn't putting down your mobile. It meant pick the landline phone off the hook and put it down so nobody can call you. It's one of the biggest distractions. I said, that's fine. What else? Then you have to make time. You have to make sure you have a certain number of hours where you just sit and write and don't do anything else. And I did that. In fact, I put a huge chunk of time aside. And thanks to those two things that he told me, I structured my day accordingly. And I've always loved writing, but I wasn't a writer because I didn't write regularly. And there's a difference between being able to write and becoming a writer. I've enjoyed this process so enormously that I certainly will keep writing.
Well, talking about people who've been instrumental in your life, influential, Parveen Babi, of course, you say terrible things were written about you. You say that it wasn't a fair perception of what actually happened. Kabir Bedi, you know, it's a thin line when you're writing a book that speaks of someone who's no longer there to defend themselves. How did you as an author navigate that? Did that play out in your mind at all?
Sir, I just decided to tell it like it is. And I spoke about things that were unfair to me or things that other people did wrong, but I didn't spare myself either. I was equally hard on myself where I went wrong, where I made mistakes, so I could have done things differently. And what happened when Parveen and I finally ended our relationship, or rather she ended it, because I'd got her the lead role in my next film, and she came back from London to continue her career in in Bollywood. Of course, the Bollywood press made a meal of it. They said, you know, Parveen has been unhinged because Kabir Bedi rejected her, and she's come back as a mental case, and she's become crazy because of it, and he's the man to blame. Oof. And I didn't say anything at the time because I thought in the end truth will out. She needs the sympathy. She needs to resurrect her career, etc. But I've spoken about it now because I think it's important to set the record straight. But I hope I was kind to her in my whole depiction of our relationship, the way everything happened, because there's no malice inside me. There's no vindictiveness inside me. I didn't set out to do a hatchet job on anybody, Pratima or Parveen. I think I was able to navigate that fine line between saying, yes, that was wrong. Yes, that was part of their nature or not. This is my mistake. A fine line, and keep a certain balance so that you don't look as though you have an agenda here to do a hatchet job on somebody. It wasn't that. It was saying, we were younger then, we were more passionate, we had our problems, and this is the best we did at the time, and this is what happened.
Well, two of your loves have passed, but you say you managed to stay friends with all of your wives, your exes. In fact, I saw on Instagram, Nikki Bedi, your wife of 12 years, has even given a strong endorsement, loving endorsement of the book. How does one manage that? Because you also say in the book at the same time that the breakup of a relationship is always painful, it's always messy, and even more complicated when there are children involved.
Yes. In Nikki's case, fortunately, there weren't any children involved. In Nikki's case, we were just we came together because I was playing Othello and she was my Desdemona, and the passion on the screen entered our lives, and to the shock and consternation of everybody, Nikki and I married, and then she wanted, at the end when I started coming back from Hollywood and was in England, she wanted to stay in England, I wanted to come back to India, and so in the best interest of all, we went our separate ways. And Nikki, I have admired the enormous success she's had as a broadcaster in England. She is absolutely one of the stars of BBC Radio, does their Arts and Culture Hour with a brilliance that is a masterclass in conducting those things. So I'm very pleased by her success. And I regard it as one of my achievements that I'm able to remain friends with my ex-wives, because as any divorced person will tell you, that's not an easy thing to do. And as I put in my book that wonderful picture of Ishel, my American wife, and Pratima, my Indian ex-wife, together with Nikki and me in our home at the time, sharing dinner around a Christmas tree. So the fact that Nikki endorses my book so strongly just shows that, you know, even she recognizes how difficult it must have been for me to write that, and how thrilled she was by how I wrote it. And she was one of my severest critics. So to get that praise from her is real high praise.
There's another question here from Daman Chatwal, who wants to know, what is the most surprising thing you discovered about yourself while writing this book?
The most surprising thing I discovered about myself while writing this book is how I survived it. I think in some ways my survival is a miracle. Somebody up there must love me, because the risks that I took and what astonishing. It was like doing a trapeze act without a net, and at times I fell. So how I survived that journey with all the uncertainties of the film business is truly a miracle that has surprised me, for which I'm most grateful. But to me, it's almost incomprehensible how I did that. But I did, and that's my story.
Babette Plitz has a question. She has a question regarding the process of writing. How often have you reviewed or reread your book before you felt or knew that this is, the final version exactly how you wanted it to be?
I wrote the book in a fevered frenzy over 6 months, the first draft. Then I turned to my three wise men, Jason DeCuna, of my first advertising guru, Andrew Whitehead, who wrote the book on my mother, Carlo Pizzati, a brilliant writer, who was married to the poet Tishani Doshi, and because I wanted the Italian point of view as well. And their comments made me review my book a little. Then, of course, I had my wife, Parveen Dosanjh, give me her insights. And then over another 3 months, I sat down and reviewed it and reworked some portions, cut out a few portions. There were a few other friends that I asked for their opinions, but not too many people, because I didn't want this to be manuscript passed around by everybody willy-nilly. So the revisions actually go on till the moment the editor yanks it out of your hands before it goes to printing. But the fundamental revisions were completed in 3 months after I wrote it. So like any good baby, it took 9 months to be born.
Kabir Bedi, thank you so much. Those who have lost and loved, who have loved and lost would agree completely. This is a great book. I recommend everyone read it because it's an honest book. It's very candid. So thank you for that. And as you say, you're going to write more. So we look forward to more of that.